Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on weird and true mysterious stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Would you like even more content? Here's my Patreon. Now onto the stories. Case file number 1048, written by irkallan. The Canyon of Secrets, a hair-raising account of the unknown. This happened in the American Southwest to my parents while on vacation. They stopped at a spot along their travel route to get some food and got to talking to a young local who worked there. He told them about a box canyon that was on the way to their next stop. For those who don't know, a box canyon is characterized by being narrow, having high vertical walls and a flat bottom. To hear my mom tell it, he described the canyon with an almost spiritual reverence, saying that it was incredibly beautiful and had superb acoustics, and that he loved taking his guitar out there to play. My folks like doing stuff off the beaten path, so they decided to pay a visit. The canyon seemed to be quite isolated, with no buildings of any kind around it for miles. By the time they parked their car and made it to the canyon's entrance, the sun was just starting to go down. They said they seemed to be the only ones there, with no parked cars other than their own. They made their way into the canyon. After the fact, my parents have both said that they separately, without speaking of it, started to feel a touch of unease. Not totally unreasonable, as it was starting to get dark and the canyon walls pressed close on either side. Despite feeling this, they continued on until they heard the noise. My parents report the nature of this noise differently. When I ask them to describe it, their faces sort of scrunch up, like it's an effortful task, and they're still uncertain. My dad says it sounded like a person, possibly a man, speaking a low, single word that he didn't understand. My mom says that it didn't really sound like a word of any kind to her, just a strange, deep noise that rang out from somewhere nearby above them. It was accompanied by a brief, intense flash of pale light. Neither of them knew what it was or where precisely it had come from, but they were both immediately filled with dread and an overwhelming desperation to get the hell out of the canyon. They turned around and booked it back to their car. As they exited the dark closed space of the canyon, my mom describes feeling certain there was something chasing them and thinking that once they got to their car, they would find it sabotaged. That, thankfully, was not the case, and they were able to get in and speed away down the empty road. My mom said she didn't feel safe until they'd been driving for a while, still having the panicked but totally unsupported notion that they were being pursued. When they eventually spoke of it to one another, they weren't able to make any real sense of what had happened. Neither one of them really has a theory. This is probably pretty dull as far as spooky experiences go, but neither of my parents have a history of weird encounters or of telling tall tales, and so it strikes me to see them both get re-creeped out by the mere memory of this incident. I've asked my mom clarifying questions since. She said that the flash of light was actually quite close to them, mere feet away, and that it sort of seemed to hang in the air for a few moments. She had a hard time describing it very clearly. Case notes are file 1048, The Canyon of Secrets, a hair-raising account of the unknown. You know, the whole time reading this story, I was thinking of that movie, I think it's 128 Hours, where this spelunker canyon explorer just hiking along. I think he's on the surface, but then he falls into a ravine and he's trapped there. He has to survive for 100 some hours, like not a week, but moving on a week, 4 days or something. Of course, he only has a tiny amount of water, no food, or like a couple bars or something. And it's just interesting what happens when you're all alone and isolated from the rest of the world. There's things out there that aren't meant to be known, or at least to know them is going to be difficult and challenging and dangerous. The light you saw, coupled with the noise, was it just a person that had a deep, rough voice? Maybe someone that was native to the area and they had a flashlight? And I could see the presence that your wife felt being related to that. You were pursued and hunted, but it was just a human being native to that environment protecting their environment. But if it was supernatural in nature, probably a skinwalker is more likely. Case file number 1049, written by Amalthea the Unicorn, The Eerie Forest Metamorphosis. About 2.5 years ago, my mom got a puppy. When he was old enough and had had his shots, I started Googling local areas where we could take him. I found there was a forest with paths nearby that I hadn't been to before. We decided to give it a try. So we went there and it was nice, but very, very hilly, to the point it was even hard to get around as I'm disabled after having had a stroke. There were also a couple of field-type areas on the perimeter that were closed off with gates and not accessible to the public. I managed to squeeze through a gap in the gate and get into one. It was nice. Not long afterwards, we went back again. It was completely different this time. I know it was the same place as we went in through the same entrance with a big sign with the wood's name outside, but it was totally different inside. Those inaccessible closed-off fields were already gone. It was much less hilly, and there was now a totally different field open to the public with a walking path through it attached to the woods. The paths were different. It was just like a totally different place. I still go there regularly, and it hasn't changed back. It really weirds me out remembering what it was like the first time. It even has a really different atmosphere now. The subsequent times I went there were suddenly loads of houses all around the woods that hadn't been there before, where the fields had been the first time. Case notes file 1049. The Eerie Forest Metamorphosis. This is a hard one to place. Could it be time peering? You were seeing into a past before things were developed? But it's hard to square that one too, because there were still those guardrails, those barriers that you said preventing you from going past where people aren't supposed to go. If you were peering in the past, they wouldn't be there, because you're talking about even the hills, the format of the land itself changing. You'd have to go back hundreds of thousands of years probably for that to alter the landscape itself, especially in the elevation of it. So if it wasn't time slipped, could it be multiversal peering? But that is also tricky because, again, the alteration of the land itself, it should require so much time. It's such a massive difference. Maybe there was development going on in a parallel universe. And actually, no, scrap that. It would be the first time you went was when you were multiversal peering into an area where there was no development at all. You were just seeing basically the raw landscape with the hills and everything. And then you stopped multiversal peering the next time you went back, and you just saw the developed land with houses nearby and the hills flattened out and all that. That makes sense to me. Bonus file written by RedCrowZen, New Orleans Terror. This story may be hard to believe, especially since I don't have the photo at hand, but I promise I'm telling you the truth. When I was a kid, I went on a church service trip to New Orleans. Our aim was to help clean up remaining damages from when Katrina hit. About midway into the trip, we helped remove brush and debris from some plot of land so a playground could be built. We were all ecstatic because the day was incredibly productive and we really believed that the spiritual forces of good and godliness were at work through us. That night, we visited Bourbon Street to have dinner, listen to some live music, and celebrate the work that had been done. At some point, one of the church leaders was taking pictures and pointed her camera to the sky, facing a distant casino. The sky was clear, no clouds. She snapped a photo, and when the screen displayed her photo, there was a silver-looking face smiling heinously while clasping his hands and protecting the casino. His face seemed metallic with many wrinkles. If you can imagine Heath Ledger Joker, but without eyes, a huge mouth, no teeth, and many wrinkles, like fabric being pulled in multiple directions, that's what it looked like. It had wet-looking orange hair that draped around midway down its face. Its nose was half missing. The entire group went hysterical when they all looked at the photo, and the rest of the night we were disturbed. The joy we had felt all day instantly went away. Few of us slept. I had a variety of hallucinations in the dark, of demons falling into me. I didn't get any sleep. There were a few girls in the room next to me who I could hear crying in terror about what had taken place. I say all this to illustrate how the incident felt like a direct, successful attempt to hijack our spirits of positive energy. One person in the group tried to come up with multiple natural explanations for the incident, but the leader who took the photo always had new details to explain how there wasn't a natural explanation for what had taken place. This incident alone has been enough to keep my agnostic butt alert and aware of all possibilities. Case notes for the bonus file. New Orleans Terror. This is very kind of you trying to directly help natural disaster victims. Seeing a lot of that now with the Ohio train derailment and all the chemicals leaking out or being burned into the atmosphere. Whoa, Dave is freaking out from that. He doesn't want to breathe it in. But yeah, it's very kind of you. The best of humanity, curiously and oddly, comes out when disaster strikes. You see that with the Katrina, hurricane floodings, all kind of tornado victims, whatever it is. We tend to bolster together, galvanize whenever it's almost like red blood cells coagulating around a wound when there's a strike. Ordinarily they don't really talk to each other that much, but when needed, when there's a great need, they come together. We're kind of similar to red blood cells. Neat. As far as the story, I think positivity grates on evil forces. It's like Dementors in Harry Potter. They want to suck all the positivity out, but it's even worse than that for them, because they feed on positive vibes. I think most evil is actually repulsed by it. It's almost like magnetism. They can't get near it. It's a repulsion effect. Their will requires negativity. Anything positive, like helping those affected by a disaster, is akin to hearing someone scratch their nails on a chalkboard. It's just, they can't tolerate it at all. It gets at you all the way deep inside your soul, or if they don't have a soul, their essence, I guess. As far as New Orleans go, I've heard from people who live there that it's a city of polar extremes. There's a great sense of good and will and strength, but also a lot of evil and intense negativity. Great divergence. It's a place I would like to visit. I've never been there, but I don't think I'd want to live there. And now time for the quote of the day. There is some good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. J.R.R. Tolkien. How relevant, right? The good in this world is us. We are the light that shines, or the mass that obscures the light. And we get to make that choice. That's the great thing about life. We decide if we're good or bad. No one else can make that choice for you, and they can try to influence it, but ultimately it's our choice to make. What are you going to choose? Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. Kinetic Symphony signing off.